Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Linda went to the back of the bus, despite the protests. Everyone was at the front, but there were seats at the back. It made no sense to jostle near the doors all the way to the final stop. Linda sighed and finally took a seat in an empty one. A woman followed her example, causing another uproar. If people had gone to the back, there wouldn't have been such a commotion at the front. But Linda observed that every time, people didn't change. Linda got off at her stop. Walking home, she was watching the rain intensify. A downpour began just as Linda entered the entrance and climbed the staircase to the second floor. It was noisy on the street. Trees that didn't have leaves yet relished the long-awaited moisture. The winter had been dry, there was no snow or rain for 3 months. Now the earth has absorbed the life-giving moisture. "Mom, I'm home," Linda said as she entered the apartment. There was no response. So, her mom probably dozed off and had been lying down all day. The illness gradually took away her remaining strength. While her mom could still manage daily life independently and Linda could left her alone at home, she understood that if she didn't earn money for her mother's treatment, the situation would worsen. Who knew? Maybe the point of no return had already been reached. Linda changed into casual clothes and put the kettle on. She felt like a stranger in her own apartment. Her entire life seemed alien. Linda had always dreamed of becoming a doctor, but she had to start working. There was no way to go to a university. Now she worked as a nurse, and there were no prospects in that regard either. Linda took any available shifts and saved every penny when possible. She was tired of living from hand to mouth, but there were no other options. Her mom, swaying slightly from side to side, entered the kitchen. She approached her daughter, kissed her on the cheek, then sat down on a chair. "How are you feeling?" Linda asked. "Fine, dear," Olivia Serrano replied. She took a deep breath and leaned back. Linda looked at her mom, who, as always, lied about her well-being. "Amelia will come soon. She'll stay with us for a couple of days, okay? There is no need to rent a place. She'll take care of the documents and then go home. You're not too worried about it, are you?" "Oh, come on. I'm glad Amelia is coming. It won't be so boring here. Besides, you almost don't have any friends here. And you've been friends with Amelia since childhood. So, I'd be happy," the mother said. "I don't think our friendship has stayed the same. So much time has passed. How long have we been apart?" "Okay, Mom, let's have dinner." But then the doorbell rang. Linda jumped up, automatically wiping her hands after washing dishes on her apron. She rushed to the corridor and opened the door. "Linda," Amelia shouted, throwing her arms around her. A childhood friend with whom they hadn't communicated for many years. But when Amelia wrote and said she had nowhere to stay just to pick up documents in the city, Linda couldn't refuse her. "Come in quickly, we're about to have dinner. I brought you a cake," Amelia said, joyfully lifting a cardboard box tied with twine. Soon they were sitting at the table, having dinner and drinking coffee. Olivia took a piece of cake and went to the living room. Amelia and Linda stayed in the kitchen. "Are you still working as a nurse? You've always dreamed of becoming a doctor, and now you're stuck with your current job?" "I perform medical procedures and don't do anything else." "You're still not a doctor. Will you continue to live like this? Time is passing, Linda, and soon you won't have a desire to jump the career ladder. Do you really want to keep being a nurse?" "Amelia, do I have a choice? I barely make ends meet, and I need to treat my mom. I work alone, and I can't afford to go to university. So maybe I'll work as a nurse for the rest of my life," she said. "Nonsense. You need to get married. I found a good guy, he has lots of money. We're getting married soon, and then I can stop working," Amelia said. "Listen, my plans changed a bit. Can I stay with you for a few days? I promise to buy groceries, and I'll help whenever there's a need for it." Linda nodded. She was glad that her mother would have company for a few hours a day. Her mom rarely went outside and rarely talked to friends. Now she would at least have someone to chat with in her free time. The next day, Linda was already at work before everyone else. Marco Torres, the hospital's chief doctor, quickly entered the room. He passed by the nurses and then came back. "Linda, are you considering enrolling next year?" he asked. "We'll have a program. You can combine it with work. With your extensive experience, I don't think it will be difficult. It's harder than studying to be a nurse, of course, but you're smart and clever. I'd like to have such a doctor." "It's unlikely to happen, Marco." "I would love to, but you understand, financially, it's not the best. My mom is seriously ill, and we can barely make ends meet. Education costs so much that no loan would cover it," Linda said. Marco nodded, looked at her meaningfully, and randomly picked up a few cards. He flipped through them, then placed them back on the counter. "Why didn't you go straight to medical university? Got scared?" he asked. "I enrolled, but then I had to drop my studies. My late father decided he wanted to take our house, invested a lot of money in lawyers, and left us without a home. And then my mom got sick, and I realized there was no time to study. I had to work. I decided to be a nurse, and I took on odd jobs. Nothing has changed since then. You're a young woman. Maybe you'll marry a good man, and he'll help you settle in life. There's still plenty of time. If you ever change your mind about studying, let me know. I'll arrange for you to be on scholarship," the chief doctor said. Inside, everything hurt. Linda felt the disappointment spreading in her chest. She would gladly go to school on scholarship and live on a shoestring, not parting with her books and notes. But it was impossible. A colleague arrived and quickly went behind the counter, glancing around. Apparently, she was afraid the chief doctor would notice she was late. The patients started to appear at the hospital. Linda got absorbed in her work, trying not to think about anything else. Linda was doing her job. She visited patients, performed necessary procedures, then headed towards the nursing room, holding a few cards. But right from the arch, a young man came out. They bumped into each other like in a dramatic melodrama, and the cards immediately scattered. "For God's sake, I'm sorry. I'm a bit lost today," the young man said. She smiled, responding that it was nothing serious. "I hope nothing got mixed up there. You're so young." "I've never seen young nurses," he said, handing her the cards he had just picked up from the floor. "So, you rarely visit hospitals," she said with a smile. He extended his hand for a handshake and introduced himself as Santiago. The young man smiled and looked at her somewhat strangely, as if trying to convey thoughts telepathically. She also froze, looking into his eyes. Santiago was a handsome, tall, and slender man with soft, dark curls. He smiled slightly, as if lifting one side of his lips higher than the other. His face looked kind, despite the sharp cheekbones. "How long have you been working here?" he asked. "Long enough to know everyone who's being treated here. I just finished bypassing everyone. I'm heading to the procedural room now. Almost every day, things here follow the same routine." "And what? Are you on your feet all day long?" he asked. "Well, you could say that. Today, I'll finish in the evening and go home. Tomorrow is my long-awaited day off. I hope everything will be in order," she said with a smile. He also smiled at her, then eventually walked away. Linda was watching him go for a few seconds. Such a cutie. But she couldn't dream about him. A guy like him would hardly notice a nurse like her. Linda went to the nursing room. "Romance at the workplace?" Flora asked. She laughed. "Oh, come on. We just bumped into each other accidentally and had a little chat." "Well, of course. Like in some melodrama." They accidentally bumped into each other in the hospital corridor, and he gazed into her eyes, Flora quoted, then burst into laughter. An elderly man standing near the nursing room shifted his gaze from one girl to another. He was about to be discharged. Flora looked at Linda. I understand your mom is sick, but you can't stay single forever. Sooner or later, you'll have to get married, and that's not the worst option. Just make sure he's not from the venereology department. Flora laughed again. Jokingly, Linda tapped her with a card and then sat down to fill out data on the computer. The girl almost finished her workday. Everything was in order, there were no emergencies. She was glad that she didn't have to stay for the night shift today. Night shifts have been tough lately, with constant problems and emergencies requiring a doctor's presence. How she wished to be that kind of doctor, rushing to help. Everything in her mind was mixed up. She was anticipating the education and realizing at the same time that it wouldn't happen. She had to face the truth, she wouldn't enter the university. It was impossible to work and study together. She simply wouldn't have time for it. By the time Linda finished her shift, it was already dark outside. She changed clothes, grabbed an umbrella, and went outside. But to her surprise, Santiago was standing right at the foot of the stairs with flowers. He was smiling, looking at her with happy, shining eyes. There was a spark in those eyes. "May I escort you?" he said with a smile. Linda involuntarily looked around, then nodded. They could walk. The evening was relatively warm, not windy. It would be nice to stroll in the evening under the yellow glow of streetlights. Despite the darkness, the city seemed to be just waking up. People were walking around, some leisurely strolling, others rushing home from work. They walked together on the sidewalk, laughing and chatting. There was dark yellow light from the lanterns, and it felt like spring. Linda arrived home completely happy. She sat on a chair, just looking ahead, taking off her shoes. It seemed she was in love. In a few days, when Amelia had already left, her mother realized that someone had appeared in her daughter's life. Linda came home a little later and started going on dates. On one hand, Olivia was happy. On the other hand, she worried a lot about her daughter. You need to be more careful. Who knows what's on his mind? You can't trust anyone these days, dear. Today he smiles at you, and tomorrow he's sleeping with your friend, the mother concluded, shaking her head disapprovingly. Linda was standing near the kitchen counter, brewing herself some coffee to stay alert for the next few hours. She needed to take a break and have a few hours for herself. Tomorrow, she would go to work and then stay for the night shift. She just wanted to read a book, watch TV, or do something insignificant. When her mother voiced her suspicions, Linda turned to her. She jumped in place, seeing the coffee slowly rising. The foam covered the coffee pot like a cap. Linda moved it aside and placed the coffee pot on the stove. "Mom, why do you always see the negative side of everything?" Linda asked. "Because I've lived a long life, dear. And believe me, there are very few positive sides to this life. I can draw such conclusions from my own history, observing the lives of my friends. We all got married, and then we got divorced. Because all our wonderful husbands suddenly turned into frogs," Olivia said. She was standing near the table, looking at her daughter. It was evident that even this simple action was difficult for her. But the woman forced herself to remain in an upright position, even if only for a short while. She had started to notice that she spent most of the day lying down without energy. It was hard for her to admit that her illness was getting worse. Olivia felt ashamed. She was relatively young, yet her daughter had to support her. She shook her head in disapproval and sat on a chair. Linda poured herself some coffee and sat opposite her mother. "I'm not saying he's bad. I'm warning you to be more cautious. One can notice many unpleasant things at the very beginning. People just refuse to notice them because they are blinded by love. Try to avoid wearing rose-colored glasses and look at the situation soberly. If you notice something wrong with him, it's better to make a decision. People don't change, my dear. You need to choose someone whose negative traits you are willing to tolerate," Olivia advised. Linda just nodded, but she didn't want to talk about it. Her mother went to the living room, leaving Linda alone in the kitchen. She was watching the weather become cloudy. She didn't feel like doing anything. Linda took a book from the shelf and sat in an armchair. She tried to focus, but she had to reread each page several times before she could finally stop listening to her own thoughts. Linda understood that her mother was just worried about her well-being. But now, the seeds of doubt that had been sown would likely continue to grow. Months passed, and their relationship became stronger. Once, he invited Linda to a restaurant. She hoped they would have a pleasant time. Instead, Santiago was completely irritated. She hadn't seen him in such a mood for a long time. Santiago quickly placed an order and slammed his hand on the table. People sitting at nearby tables looked at him attentively but apparently decided not to pay any attention. You know what my grandpa does with everything, right? Our family has a pretty big business, but Grandpa, Roque Moreno, controls everything. He's our guiding light. The guy said spitefully, twisting his face. He began to resemble a resentful teenager who could barely contain his emotions. Yeah, you've told me, Linda said with a smile. She hoped that her good mood could lift his spirits. However, Santiago completely fell apart. He nervously glanced around, expecting the waiter. Imagine, I went to Grandpa, told him I wanted to start my own business, and he told me to go away. He said he wouldn't give me any money. He started lecturing me, saying that he achieved everything on his own, and now I should work hard too. But I don't understand why I should work so hard and make a living if he's not going to make your family's life easier. He gives money to his daughter, to my mother, so to speak. She divides it equally among the three of us. I just don't get it. Doesn't his conscience bother him? Santiago slammed his hand on the table again, making Linda jump in surprise. He raised his hand conciliatorily, as if apologizing for his behavior, and looked at her with regret. He said I could join his company. I could start my career there, but only from the very bottom. I'm not okay with that. Why did he build a business? To manipulate his family later? Despite having a lot of money, he uses public transport. Financially, he doesn't really help us. Our whole family is pushing him to hand over the business. But he screams in a fit that he will lead it until the very end, as long as he can. Santiago hit the table again, and Linda got scared. Maybe he came from a poor childhood himself? Maybe he's just afraid that he'll suddenly be left without money? She asked cautiously. Santiago just shook his head in disagreement. He lowered his gaze, looking down at the colorful plate. He didn't want to talk about this topic. He had already shared most of his negativity. Santiago looked at his girlfriend, smiled, and tried to keep his emotional flow under control. He felt embarrassed for saying all of this to her. Sorry that it turned out this way. I understand that I should have taken control of myself a long time ago. I need to find a job. Ideally, I should stop talking to Grandpa after this. He just doesn't want to help our family. He hopes to take all the money to the grave. What a fool. Santiago said offendedly. Have you tried talking to him about a probationary period? Let him entrust you with managing the company, and you can prove to him what you're capable of. Let him be there to guide you, Linda suggested. He'd rather sell his whole company and scatter the money in the wind from a helicopter than agree to such a step. Linda, he's out of his mind. It's useless to negotiate with him, the guy said. Linda preferred not to give more advice. She hoped the conversation was over, but Santiago still seemed to hold a grudge against his grandpa. You know, my mother got sick last month, and the doctor prescribed her a whole bunch of medicines. She went straight to her father, but he just shrugged his hands. He says she should start earning on her own now. How could she work if she's sick? It seems to me that he doesn't care about our family at all. He lives in some of his own illusions. Santiago fell silent. Linda didn't ask any more questions. Obviously, the date was ruined. Santiago just shook his head negatively and took his beloved's hand. He awkwardly smiled, as if apologizing for his behavior. Linda smiled back at him, as if holding no grudge. But no one was in the mood after that conversation. Santiago tried to somehow lighten the evening. He changed the topic of conversation, talking about his future plans. He constantly repeated that he wanted a family and that he was already serious. Linda understood that they were dating too little for a proposal, but for some reason, a feeling warmed inside her that he would propose to her. Surely, if I introduced you to my grandpa, he'd be delighted. He always said I would choose some greedy girl. But you are completely different, modest, kind, and caring. I think he would be happy. Although, if my grandpa can be happy at all, he lives like a rat in a drain instead of enjoying his money. What drives him? Santiago didn't realize how he had returned to talking about his grandfather. Linda could barely endure that evening. Finally, she came home. There was nothing to tell her mother, as there was nothing good about this date. Her boyfriend just complained for hours while they were having dinner. Listen, dear, I've been thinking. Maybe you should sell Grandma's house? Mom, what are you talking about? Didn't you want to move there? Linda said, surprised. Her mother shook her head. She sat across from her daughter, gently took her hands, and then looked into her eyes. Linda, you've always dreamed of becoming a doctor. You wanted everything to be different. Your life went downhill because of me. Mom, what do you mean? Don't interrupt me. It's a well-kept house, not a barn. You can sell it and use the money for your education. Mom. Linda fell silent. Her mother apparently had no idea how much money they actually spent every month. Even if Linda sold the house, even if they managed to live in austerity for some time, the money wouldn't be enough for even half of the tuition. Linda tried to gently explain to her mother, but she just shook her head negatively. She tried to help her daughter somehow, but nothing worked. Don't worry, Mom, everything will be fine somehow, Linda said, smiling. And how will everything get better? Linda, you will never become a doctor if you don't enroll now. I can't leave you. I can't leave you without medications, without treatment, without doctors. I will never forgive myself if I don't save up for an operation for you. And when you recover, you will go to Grandma's house. You will live there as you always dreamed. You'll make a large flower bed and fill it with roses. You'll sit in a rocking chair, reading books, surrounded by butterflies. Isn't that what you dreamed of? You can't give up your life just for my dream. No, Mom, but I can for your life, Linda said. Olivia burst into tears. Linda embraced her, held her close, and gently stroked her back to calm her down a bit. Her mother cried out of frustration that she couldn't improve her daughter's life. It should have been the other way around. Olivia should have sacrificed herself for life priorities just to improve her daughter's life. But something went wrong. That night, Linda couldn't sleep for a long time, even though she needed to get some rest because the next day she had a night shift. Linda felt like she was completely falling out of reality. The longer she stayed in constant tension, the more she realized the hopelessness of the situation. Her mother was right. If Linda didn't act now, she would never become a doctor. But maybe she should have given up her dream. Maybe she should have just left everything as it is. There was nothing wrong with working as a nurse. She could just let go of her dream, relax, and not worry about it. When Linda came to work, her head was wooden, she slept poorly, and terrible nightmares haunted her. She wanted to sleep badly. Her friend covered for her. Linda lay down in the nurse's room and almost immediately fell asleep. When she opened her eyes, she saw the chief doctor. Not good, he said with a smile. Linda immediately understood that he wasn't angry. Sleep for another half an hour, there's almost no one around. Your friend over there is sitting idle. A bad day, right? Don't worry, the night will be worse. Sleep for now. I just came to check the records. Linda involuntarily smiled and almost instantly fell asleep again. She didn't want to talk about anything. She didn't want to justify herself or make up excuses. She was sleeping, enjoying the moment. When Linda woke up, she found that she had spent 4 hours in the nurse's room. Flora was sitting behind the counter and completely ignored the fact that she was now working alone. "Are you okay? Have a cup of coffee, it will make you feel better. At least your face looks good now, you were really pale," Flora said, handing her a tall glass of coffee. Linda accepted it gratefully. She almost immediately sat down with the cards and checked on all the patients. It felt as if no one had noticed her absence on this lazy day. It was okay, she would probably make up for it tonight. When Santiago suddenly appeared right next to the counter, Linda jumped in surprise. "Linda, I'm leaving for 2 weeks. I need to go urgently." "What? Where?" she asked. "I need to go to another city to sort out my aunt's mess with selling her apartment. It's urgent. I came to say goodbye. I'll call you when I reach the place." She didn't even have a chance to say a word. He kissed her, squeezed her hand slightly, and then headed to the exit. Flora, who had been watching the situation from the side, shook her head disapprovingly. "Your guy is suspicious, Linda. He didn't explain anything properly, didn't warn you in advance, and he even came to your workplace. Probably on purpose, so you wouldn't have time to ask questions. Of course, it's your decision, but at the very least, it's strange. Maybe he's really in a hurry. It's our women's nature to justify men, even though they behave like pigs. And then, after years, you realize that he is indeed a skunk," Flora snorted. "Come on, get ready to take over the shift. It's starting now. I almost went crazy during the last night shift. The patients were coming one after another. The ambulance was constantly running around." Linda nodded. The night shift was indeed challenging. Linda, from time to time, grabbed her phone, hoping that the young man would call. He promised to call her as soon as he arrived at his destination. But a day passed, then 2, then a week, and there was still no news from him. He didn't write, and he didn't answer her calls. At first, Linda was deeply distressed, but then she realized that there was no point in being anxious. If he decided to break up with her like this, then so be it. If he had any problems, he'd return and explain everything. Santiago was sitting on a long, soft couch, crossing one leg over the other. He had a treacherously strong desire to put both legs on the coffee table. His mother, who had just entered the living room, looked at him, crossing her arms over her chest. "So what? Do you think your grandpa will be delighted with the upcoming wedding? Are you sure she's the right girl at all?" Malvina Moreno asked discontentedly. "Mom, she's not like anyone I've been with before. That's why you decided not to call or write to her for 2 weeks, right?" The woman asked with mockery in her voice. She smirked, and he didn't like that smirk at all. "You know what your problem is. For some reason, you think you know everything better than everyone else. If you were so smart, you would have taken over our family fortune from Grandpa a long time ago. Instead, we're on a short leash, like purebred little dogs. If you're so smart, go ahead. But I don't think a self-respecting girl will forgive a guy who ignored her for 2 weeks. And if she doesn't respect herself, why do you need such a wife?" Santiago only snorted discontentedly. He didn't want to talk to his mother in such a tone, but she forced him to. These 2 weeks were a test for Linda. If she forgave him after this, it would mean she could forgive a lot. And for Santiago, it was important that the woman be compliant and convenient. If he was indeed going to get married, he needed to carefully choose his bride. Just don't tell Grandpa anything. If he finds out you're getting married, he'll think you're trying to snatch his money for the wedding. Oh, come on, Mom. Is Grandpa really that mean? It's his grandson's wedding. Whether he likes it or not, he'll have to shell out. The young man said cheerfully. You're a fool, Santiago, if you're counting on him. He's not the kind of person who will indulge you. If you tell him, he'll throw a fit, his mother said, sitting next to her son. You want to get married? Go ahead. She lit a cigarette and ruffled her son's hair. Malvina looked wistfully towards the turned-off television. My father has completely lost his mind with his money. When he started his business, I was very young. I dreamed that everything would be fine for us. Even when my mother got seriously ill, he didn't give a penny. He holds onto his money as if he will take every penny to the afterlife. I understand it was hard for him to earn that money. But we're not planning to squander it. I will never forgive him for not giving me money for my treatment. And I will never forgive him for not getting my mom out of the hospital bed. Malvina said, I thought maybe we should start our own business. Or hit Grandpa on the head, take him to the forest, and leave him there. The young man said and burst into laughter. Malvina laughed. She ruffled her son's hair again, then got up from the couch and went to the window. The woman turned the handle, then blew smoke directly out of the window. He looked at his mother and understood how much she was upset about her father's behavior. After all, she will never forgive him. It was strange that Roque, literally with one foot in the grave, didn't even try to improve relations with his relatives. He fell out with everyone over his money. Who will pray for him? No one. And you don't talk to him either. Does he want to live separately? Damn it. I don't want to deal with him anymore. When he gets older, let him pay for his own caregiver. I won't come to him for any favors. Malvina declared. Santiago nodded. In fact, he was planning to come to his grandfather soon to talk to him about the upcoming wedding. Unlike his mother, Santiago believed that Roque would definitely be delighted. Especially since, after a series of flashy girls, he finally chose a worthy match. I want you to meet her. I'm not particularly eager to arrange this meeting. Do you think I'm going to like her? I doubt it. You have terrible taste in women. You used to date some arrogant girls, and now a gray mouse, his mother said. Santiago didn't tell his mother anything more. He was planning how he would communicate with his girlfriend after such a separation. But first, he decided to go to his grandfather. Santiago arrived at a small house where his grandfather lived. He didn't just live here, he inhabited it, as the house was almost abandoned. Despite having a pile of money, his grandfather didn't even try to improve his own living conditions. He hoarded every penny and led a pauper's lifestyle. Despite his mother's pleas, Santiago was sure that his grandfather had long lost his mind. However, he tried to be friendly with him, hoping that the grandfather would leave him an inheritance. Who knew? Maybe this person wasn't completely crazy. Santiago had just entered the house when he heard his grandfather grumbling. Wipe your feet. What, came for money? No, of course not, Santiago said. Oh, of course. Your whole family is just trying to squeeze money out of me, the old man said in a disapproving voice. Santiago rolled his eyes. It was already clear how their conversation would go. The young man smiled. He wanted to appear friendly and calm. However, the grandfather didn't want to stop. The young ones only want to squander other people's money. You're already an adult. Why don't you start your own business? You don't want to work for me. You don't want to open your own business. What do you want from me, then? I came to tell you happy news. I've decided to get married. I wanted to invite you to meet my fiancée, the young man said. Ah, so you came to beg for money for the wedding? The old man croaked, then spat on the floor. Santiago recoiled in surprise. He did not expect his grandfather to react like this. Give him money for the wedding. All you want is to stick your hands into my pocket. The grandfather rolled his eyes. I'm working really hard, and all you want is money. No one wants to work. Santiago froze. He didn't know how to continue the conversation that had gone wrong from the very beginning. I don't need any money for the wedding. What? Does your girl want to take all my money? Or what? You probably married a fool just like yourself. All you want is money. No one wants to work. The old man exclaimed. She's a good and kind girl. She works as a nurse, taking care of her sick mother. She's not one of those who only need money, Santiago said conciliatorily. They all say that. Everyone says they don't need money, and then all they do is beg for money. Get out of here!" the old man shouted. Santiago didn't argue. His grandfather clutched his heart and sat down on a chair. The young man wanted to approach him and help, but the old man briskly dismissed him. Santiago decided not to talk about anything else. He simply left the house and headed to his car. He bought a large bouquet of flowers and went to his beloved. He swore and pledged that he simply couldn't call. He didn't make up anything. He honestly admitted that he wanted to test her fidelity during these 2 weeks. He confessed to being a complete fool and promised never to act like that again. She forgave him, as he had hoped. In the end, Linda herself didn't understand how these days had passed by. There was so much work to do that she could barely keep up. Now, when they were together, nothing else mattered. "I thought, maybe we should meet my parents. I've already talked to them. I hoped Grandpa would come, but he told me to go away. I don't want to spoil your mood. I won't tell you in what manner he did it," Santiago said. "I don't think it's a good idea, Santiago. I won't appeal to your parents. I'm from a completely different social layer. Besides, you yourself said that none of your previous girlfriends appealed to them. Why do you think I would?" She replied, "Yeah, I don't care whether they like you or not. My attitude towards you doesn't depend on that. I love you. Everything is fine between us. I just want us to follow the formality. Understand? After all, we're moving towards more serious things, right?" he asked with a smile. She smiled awkwardly but didn't say anything more. He smiled, hugged her tightly, and pushed her onto the bed. They both looked at the ceiling and spoke in hushed voices. "Someday, we'll get married anyway. I want everything to be right. Do you understand? I'll propose to you after I introduce you to my parents. It doesn't matter how they react, especially since I know my parents too well. My mother is not an easy person, but she quickly gets over things. And my father. Well, no one in our family really listens to him," Santiago said, laughing. "Do you really want us to get married?" she asked. "Why not? Our relationships are perfect. We've grown to love each other, so we can start living together. If everything goes well in everyday life, then we'll get married. Why wait? We love each other and look at life the same way. So, maybe it's time to take some action for our adult lives? Maybe I'm not the best option for a husband, but you'll be the perfect wife," he said. Linda smiled but immediately became sad. She understood that she couldn't leave her mother. There was no money to hire a carer, and living together with Santiago was not an option since he made it clear he didn't want that kind of life. He leaned over her, propped up on his elbow. "Don't worry, we'll figure something out with your mother. We'll live together, and there will be more money. We'll hire a caregiver. You postpone the surgery, maybe you'll cure your mom just in time," he said, brushing off as if he had just read her thoughts. Linda, however, realized that saving up money for her mother's surgery might take more than a year. She needed to decide on it as soon as possible. No one would give her a loan with such a salary. Besides, she would have to add more to it. After the surgery, there would be rehabilitation, which would also require money they didn't have. Whenever Linda started thinking about it, she experienced a panic attack. Her chest tightened, she couldn't breathe, and her heart seemed to beat really fast. Linda went to the kitchen and made herself some coffee. Santiago approached her and gently kissed her on the top of her head, saying, "I don't want you to worry about this. I'll find a nice restaurant, the best one in our city. You just need to come on time for us to have dinner and talk. No one is asking you to be the best friend for my mother, right? So, don't stress too much. But what if your mother categorically forbids you to marry me?" Linda asked. "Why do you think so?" Santiago chuckled. "Don't overthink this too much, Linda. My mom is not the easiest person, but we can deal with it. She's just fixated on herself and her own life. She might tell me that she doesn't like you, but that's it. My father firmly believes that I'll ruin my life if I get married. Well, he has his own quirks. Santiago laughed when he remembered the polarized opinions of his parents. Moreover, he needed to introduce her to his parents. Santiago wanted to prove to them that he could choose a worthy girl for life. Regarding the wedding, Santiago understood that such a convenient girl would fit perfectly. He could maintain his current lifestyle, and at the same time, he would have a clean house and good food, and all of it would be a privilege, specially provided for him. And if he wanted some other girl, he could simply have a lover. Linda had no idea about the thoughts running through his mind. I want us to be there together. We're a couple, and we'll meet my parents together. Didn't you want our relationship to become more serious? He knew which strings to pull to get her to agree. Linda hesitated for a moment but eventually agreed to meet them. The beautiful restaurant was illuminated with yellow lamps, and the interior resembled old Italian eateries. Despite its overall simplicity, the menu here was one of the most expensive in the city. Santiago wanted to make a favorable impression on both his parents and Linda. The idea was to show how modest she was and that even in an expensive restaurant, she would hesitate to order something. His mother entered the restaurant almost on time. She tossed her coat to a man, then quickly headed to the table. Her expression was irritated, and she kept biting her lips. If Malvina behaved like this, it meant that nothing good could be expected from the meeting. Your grandfather went to the notary. I have no idea where he is going now. You know, he changed his will. But this old bear is not planning to tell me who gets what. Malvina, don't flatter yourself, David Iglesias shrugged. What? Don't flatter myself. Is it my fault he's my father? While he was saving every penny, I was burying my mother. And after all that, I won't get anything? It's easier to sit and wait than to try to get anything from him. Malvina said. Santiago looked at his watch. His girlfriend still had 15 minutes to arrive on time, but for some reason, she didn't even call. He had hoped until the last moment that she would come on time. Well, where's your princess? Santiago, if I knew we'd have to wait for her, I wouldn't have rushed so much. I arrived on time, and it never happens, she said. If only you were late for our first date, my whole life would be completely different. The man chuckled. Okay, David, let's divorce. Stop whining. Malvina snapped. Meanwhile, Linda was on the bus. There was little time, but she was sure she would make it. As soon as the bus stopped, a disheveled, frightened girl burst into public transport. Her eyes seemed bigger, hidden behind thin, light strands of hair. Old man is dying there. The old man is dying at the bus stop. Help! The girl screamed. Linda rushed out onto the street and saw the old man. The elderly man, leaning to one side, was breathing heavily. He gasped for air, but his chest seemed not to rise at all. Linda took out her phone, quickly called an ambulance, and then started to help the old man. She laid him on the ground, unbuttoned his jacket, and began artificial respiration, but the old man was already losing consciousness. Darling, the old man repeated, looking at her and grabbing her hands. His eyes were wandering when the ambulance arrived. Go with me, darling. Linda broke free from his grip. They laid him on a stretcher and put him in the ambulance. Antonio, who was on duty today, wiped the sweat from his forehead. I'm sorry, I can't go with you. Darling. The old man repeated. Linda, you don't need to go with us. Were you going home? Go, we'll handle this ourselves. Why would you go with him? He'll recover and won't even remember your name, Antonio said. He shook her hand firmly and jumped into the ambulance. The car, signaling brightly, maneuvered swiftly between cars. Linda was standing as if rooted to the spot. She came to her senses, looked at her watch, and realized with horror how much time had passed. When she burst into the restaurant, everyone was already dissatisfied. Plates were on the table. They had clearly finished the meal. The woman sitting to the right of Santiago scowled in dissatisfaction. Honey, if you're meeting with parents, you can't be late. This is not just a date. If your parents didn't teach you to be punctual, it's not our problem. I always knew my son wouldn't be able to find a good girl. Now we have a disaster." Malvina rolled her eyes, saying, "Seriously, where were you? You've never been late, and now—" An old man at the bus stop suddenly felt unwell. I rushed to give him first aid. I called an ambulance. And what? Should I have left him to die? If he's too old, you could let him die. Why are you so worried? He won't even remember you when he recovers. Besides, he seems to have lived a decent life if he's unwell at a bus stop. Maybe this is his last stop, David said and laughed. The girl just stood in shock. She didn't understand what to say to these people. Even if she had 10 attempts to guess what they would tell her, Linda would never have guessed it would be about this. Do you meet your boyfriend's parents every day? Do you get a man like our Santiago every day? And can't you revive people in your hospital every day? You need to set priorities right, dear, Malvina said with contempt. We'll go outside now, talk, and then come back. Can't you at least wait here? Linda was sitting in her place, lowering her head and trying to hide her tears. Nausea was rising in her throat as she had too many emotions inside her. She didn't know how they would be so cruel to her just because she saved a person at the bus stop. So what if the old man won't remember her? Should she have broken up with him? Linda closed her eyes, almost crying. She leaned back and tried to focus. Please pay the bill, the waitress said, approaching her. What? Emerging from her own thoughts, Linda asked. I said it's time to pay the bill. Everyone has already left, and you're the only one left. Are you sure everyone has left? Linda asked, frightened. I am absolutely sure. Are you refusing to pay? I can call the police, the girl said arrogantly. I'll leave you alone for a few minutes. She stepped aside. When Linda opened the bill, she was stunned by the numbers. She didn't spend that much money in a week. Of course, she didn't have that much. She immediately started calling acquaintances, trying to find someone who could lend her money. Flora arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes later. Linda scraped together the last remaining money. Flora covered the remaining amount, and they left the restaurant together. Linda immediately sat on a bench and burst into tears loudly. She couldn't believe such a situation had happened to her. Flora drove her home, although she didn't understand what had happened. Linda promised to tell everything tomorrow. As soon as the girl entered the apartment, she retold everything to her mother, still crying. There's nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart. Now I speak like that old man. I remember what my mother used to say. Do you remember? She said, sweetheart, get down from the apple tree, it's too early to pick the fruits. The woman warmly laughed. It was a good time when we had a family. And now we're the only ones left for each other. Not the worst option, Mom, the girl said and smiled. Linda leaned back in the armchair. She stared into space, imagining how to move forward. The money she spent was supposed for 2 weeks. She would have to dip into her savings to somehow get by. Linda looked at her mother. The woman struggled to get up from the bed and looked at her. Maybe I should go to a hospice. You won't be able to build your life as long as you have such a burden on your shoulders, the woman said. Mom, what nonsense. What hospice? It's a place for hopeless people who are unwanted by their own relatives. I love you, we'll overcome everything together. Don't say such things anymore. You know I love you very much. Mom, don't mention hospices again. No way you'll go there. Let's hope for the best. We will pay for your surgery. You will stand on your feet and be healthy. Linda couldn't stand it when her mother brought up this topic. She sighed heavily, trying to calm down. She didn't want to lose her temper with her mother, who was already feeling bad. The woman lay down again, looking at her daughter with loving eyes. Linda was ready to give up her entire life just to keep her mother alive and well. She needed surgery, but they couldn't do such an operation in their native country. To go abroad, they needed much more money. When Linda started calculating the total amount of money needed, she soberly realized that she couldn't earn that much as a nurse. Think about it yourself, maybe it's for the best. You haven't had time to build long-term relationships, you haven't had time to get married, and you already understand what kind of person he is and what his relatives are like. Maybe it's for the best? The mother asked. The girl waved her hand, but tears streamed down her face. She wiped them away with her palms without embarrassment. I just didn't expect them to make me pay such a bill. You know, Mom, I actually thought he was the perfect match for me. I fell in love like a fool. I even forgave him for his 2-week absence. I feel completely stupid, she said, displeased. Linda looked out the window. It was already completely dark. Even the street lamp in the yard had stopped glowing. She went to bed but couldn't fall asleep for a long time. She had a night shift, she couldn't just toss and turn. Linda felt that the longer she delayed it, the worse it would get. She had to call Santiago tomorrow and tell him that their relationship was over. Linda woke up on time, just a few minutes before the alarm. She turned off the phone alarm and went to the kitchen, where her mother was already up. She prepared breakfast and placed it on the table with a self-satisfied look. See, I can still do something. I'm in such a good mood today, the weather is wonderful. I'll call Ariel and ask her to come over. We'll sit by the entrance and chat, she said with a smile. Linda was glad to hear that her mother was in a good mood. After all, she should at least derive some pleasure from life. Lately, Olivia has often talked about hospices, about some home for the sick where she would be taken care of. But Linda herself was afraid of all these things. She would never let her mother go to such a place. Linda went to work in a good mood. Despite what happened yesterday, she wasn't going to let it ruin her day. Besides, today would be a preventive care day for the elderly, so there would be enough work. We need to keep up our spirits so we don't collapse by the end of the day. Flora dragged her into a small room next to the wards. She was horrified to hear what had happened. There were many people. They decided to talk while setting up IVs for the patients. Imagine, I saved an old man at the bus stop. I waited until the ambulance took him away. During that time, they had lunch, behaved rudely with me, humiliated me in front of everyone in the restaurant, and then left, leaving the entire bill on me. I didn't even eat a crumb. Linda said. They didn't even notice that they were standing in the ward of the same old man she had saved. So it was you who saved me? God bless you, dear. I don't remember much. Who deceived you like that? The old man asked, frowning. He began to gently hold her hands, thanking her for saving him. I was dating a guy, Santiago. He wanted to introduce me to his parents, so he invited me to an expensive restaurant. I was initially afraid to go there because they seemed to be wealthy, and I'm just a simple girl. I was terribly worried, and in the end, he treated me like that. Can you imagine? I didn't even eat anything there. I had to give away money, now I'm left with debts. Now my sick mother and I have nothing to live on. Damn scoundrels! Exclaimed the old man. You don't need such relatives. You should be happy that you understood what kind of person he was from the start. And don't worry, damn them. But then the door swung open, and Santiago, Malvina, and David entered. Linda was simply stunned. When the old man stared at his savior and then at the people who entered, he understood everything. So, you wish I'd be dead, right? Is this how you value human life? Santiago, I thought you were different, not like your parents. Beg for forgiveness however you want. Until this girl forgives you, I won't give you a single penny. The old man roared. Everyone was still. It felt as if no one was even breathing. Linda shifted her gaze from the failed relatives to the old man whose life she had saved. At that time, she had no idea who he was. Miss, please forgive me, I was too harsh, Malvina said without much enthusiasm. The others remained silent. Linda stormed out of the room, and Santiago hurried after her. Do you even realize she had to borrow money? She works alone in her family, supporting herself and her sick mother. She could spend the money she spent on you at the restaurant for 2 weeks. And you just feasted there. Flora said disapprovingly. She should have come on time, Malvina snapped. Yes, indeed, she should have left the old man dying at the bus stop just to please Malvina. Malvina, I couldn't stand you since childhood. You are just like your mother. The old man said discontentedly. Don't you dare mention my mother at all. If not for you, she would still be alive. You did nothing to save her life. You had the money to pay for her operation, but you held back. Are you satisfied now? Malvina yelled. Stop yelling, you're in the hospital. Your father is seriously ill, he had a heart attack. Don't unnecessarily stress him out. Flora bluntly interrupted. Don't interfere. Some random girl wants to teach me about life. Malvina protested. Don't worry, my daughter couldn't care less whether I survived or not. It would suit her if I croaked at that bus stop. They would gladly divide the business. This whole family is just waiting for me to kick the bucket. In the meantime, Santiago hurried along the long corridor and managed to take Linda's hand. Linda turned sharply, looking at him with a disappointed gaze. When he saw how much pain was in her eyes, he involuntarily stepped back. I couldn't disobey my mother. It was her idea for us to leave, and you stayed and paid for everything. She wanted to teach you a lesson, you know? Tell the old man that everything is fine between us. Tell him that you forgave us. Then we'll all talk with you together, Santiago said cautiously, choosing his words. She was just stunned. Instead of apologizing to her, he made her look like a fool who didn't understand that she was now playing a crucial role in their relationship with the old man. Yet Linda had no intention of backing down. She looked at her boyfriend and realized that they couldn't be a couple. Linda couldn't believe she was once so deeply in love with this guy. She looked at Santiago and understood that she probably just made up all those character traits she fell in love with. Linda, let's talk. We are adults, we can find a compromise. Come on, it happened. I explained everything to you, my mother insisted on it. Besides, we've already talked about this. My grandpa has been losing it for a long time, Santiago began, but Linda cut him off. You know, Santiago, I think your grandpa is the only one who is in his mind. You and your parents have completely lost your minds. You don't care about human life. I don't want to talk to you anymore, really. I want you to leave me alone, she firmly stated. Linda walked towards the nursing station. Santiago grabbed her, held her hand tightly, and looked into her eyes. There was no tenderness in his gaze anymore. Apparently, Santiago decided to be persistent by any means. You will go and talk to him now. You must tell him that you forgive us and treat us calmly. I won't let you ruin what I've been working on for so long. Do you think you'll get away with this? He warned. I don't care, Linda said. She pulled her hand away and then walked to where she was heading. Santiago, stunned, was watching her. He didn't even consider that she wouldn't forgive him and take him back. It seemed like all his plans had collapsed in an instant, but he realized it only in that moment. He returned to the room. The whole group was still here, except for Flora. Malvina was sitting on a chair, David was standing in the corner, and Santiago now took a place near the door. Gathered here like vultures. Are you waiting for me to die so you can be happy? I can't trust you, you're not a family, the old man shouted. Well, then die here alone. David rudely cut him off, being the first to leave the room. Santiago and his mother still lingered, exchanging glances. Perhaps they still hoped that all family members would come to peace. Why do you have so much hatred for your own family? Are we asking for millions from you? You have so much money that even Santiago's grandchildren could live comfortably without working. Can't you provide for your own family? It's not like we're asking for mansions and Rolls Royces. Malvina shouted, her patience worn thin. Right away, Linda entered the room. she didn't even look at Malvina and Santiago. Visiting hours are over. You all need to leave the room right now, or I'll call security. You're pushing the old man towards a heart attack. After what he's been through, you should do everything to avoid causing him unnecessary stress. Get out of here immediately. How dare you, girl? Do you even realize how we can ruin your life? Get out of here. You won't threaten me. The old man barked. Malvina glanced at the girl, then stormed out of the room. Santiago followed his mother, but with much less apparent eagerness. If you want, we won't let them in anymore, the girl said. They'll devour you. You shouldn't get into this. You don't need such relatives. They smile at you in the face, but in the evening, they talk badly about you and your mom. You shouldn't let them into your family. You're too kind and good. You'll find another husband, Roque warned. I have other concerns, Roque. What concerns could you possibly have at your age? The old man smirked. I dropped out of university. I always dreamed of becoming a doctor, and now I work as a nurse. I save every penny to get my mom the surgery she needs. I'm not in the mood to have affairs right now, she said with a sad smile. Excuse me, but I need to check on the patients. She smiled slightly and then left the room. The old man was lying there alone, processing the information that had just fallen on him in a matter of minutes. He certainly knew that all his relatives were dishonest people, but he never suspected they could treat a poor girl who saved his life like this. His daughter's words lingered in his mind. Santiago showed up the next day. He brought a bouquet of flowers, opting for a traditional approach. He appeared with a satisfied face right outside the hospital building. The cheerful Santiago extended the bouquet to his beloved, but Linda rejected it. It was evident from his face that he didn't expect this. Are you breaking up with me over this situation? So many good things happened between us, and you're ending things with me over a silly grudge? Santiago asked in surprise. Yes, Santiago, we broke up. Don't even count on it making up. You're driving a wedge between us just to get your grandfather's money. No, I don't need any money, Santiago said. Then let's go to him. Officially tell him you don't need the money, then we can be together, Linda said. Santiago involuntarily stepped back, his face twisted in displeasure. Linda laughed. Everything was clear. The old man was right. One shouldn't get involved with these people. She shook her head in disapproval, descended the stairs, and headed towards the bus stop. He'll die soon anyway. My parents will calm down. You and I will open a business somewhere else and move away. With this money, you'll benefit too. You can cure your mom. What's wrong with that? Santiago asked. Once you get the money, you'll be gone. It's over, Santiago, she firmly said. Linda jumped on the bus, and soon, only a faint scent of her perfume lingered, quickly carried away by the wind. Sitting on the bus, Linda was looking at the evening city. She thought only about going home and spending time with her mother. Her mother tried to get up more often. The treatment was showing results. Of course, it masked the illness, but it didn't cure it. She urgently needed to pay for the operation. Linda considered various options in her mind. It was a pity that selling the house wouldn't solve the problem. Linda dreamed of her mother getting better and of how she would move to her beloved grandmother's house. She dreamed of visiting her mother and seeing her happily tending to the garden. Everything would be perfectly ideal if it could be called life. Linda continued to go to work. She checked on patients and fulfilled her duties, but mentally, she was always beside her mother. The doctor recently told her that the operation was needed within the next year. If she couldn't miraculously find the money, her mother's surgery would be in vain. Every evening, Linda fell asleep with tears, well aware that there was nowhere to get such a huge amount of money. Are you still mad at me? The old man asked when she entered his room. Roque sat on the bed, holding a book in his hands. Next to him was a long notebook with phrases that he wrote down. She involuntarily glanced at it, then smiled. Linda had never had grandparents. Her grandmother and grandfather died a long time ago. She was so little that she only remembered her grandmother. She outlived her husband by only 4 years, and they lived alone with her mother. No, of course not. I'm glad to see that you're gradually recovering. I hope you'll feel much better soon. When they discharge you, please stick to the doctor's recommendations. Pedro Fernandez is an excellent person. He certainly knows what he advises. You would have been an excellent doctor, too. Perhaps, I don't know. I have dreamed of becoming a doctor since I was 10. I wore a white coat, which, in reality, was my mom's blouse. I imagined treating everyone. Sometimes it seems to me that our childhood dreams never come true. I got into college on a scholarship, can you imagine? She unintentionally sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her own hands. She hadn't told this story in a long time. Everyone praised me. I was the first in terms of points. I still remember the professor saying I was the best in the class. I had already been trained as a nurse. Consider me ready-made staff. I thought it would be easier for me to study. But then my mom got much worse, and I had to drop out and start working. So, that's why I'm here, she said. Can't you go to university while working at the hospital? I can. The chief physician even says he might arrange it in such a way that I'll get a scholarship. But think about it, studying medicine is not easy. I'll be constantly in classes, and with the workload I have now, there won't be time. It means I won't be able to save up for my mom's operation. It means we won't have enough for food. It means my mom will be without medicine. Too many reasons to stop dreaming about it. Linda shook her head negatively. She forced a smile and said, You know, my life isn't the worst. People sometimes deal with much more complicated problems. Maybe it's for the best. You just have to forget about your dream and move on. I hope they discharge you soon, she said with a smile. Linda left the office, but he stopped her. I will help you become a doctor. I'm willing to support someone like you. You don't need money or anything. You just genuinely want to help people. I'll help you, kid. We'll figure it out, the old man said. Linda warmly thanked him, but she already knew that he was just saying these words for no reason. It was unlikely that he would help someone he barely knew. Linda felt out of place, even in the same room with him. A person who earned such crazy amounts of money lived like a recluse. Even his family didn't acknowledge him. He had disowned everyone. Maybe Santiago was right. There was clearly something wrong with the old man's mind. So, expecting his help was, at the very least, strange. They discharged the old man. He cheerfully walked on his own feet, thanking everyone warmly. Along with his gratitude, he left an envelope for Linda, stating that it was compensation for the restaurant and careless relatives. The amount there was 3 times more than Linda paid at the restaurant. She immediately paid Flora back, and all the remaining money she neatly placed in a box, where she carefully saved up money for her mother's surgery. So, congratulations, the chief doctor said with a self-satisfied look, entering the nursing station. Flora was sitting on the couch, stretching her legs. It was a very tough day. Linda, also tired, was watching TV. Both of them synchronously looked at the chief doctor. The man was completely satisfied, his eyes shining. Dear Linda, congratulations. You've been accepted to the medical faculty. The man said, bowing as if he were an old courier. What? Linda's eyes nearly popped out of surprise. The man laughed and handed her a letter with documents. She printed it out, and she couldn't believe her eyes. A certain Roque Moreno has become your benefactor. Linda, you can study at the university. The old man paid for your entire course. Can you imagine? Linda, I'm very glad we'll have a wonderful doctor. Congratulations. He said it again. Linda rushed to hug everyone around, and then she burst into tears of joy, clutching the papers to herself. The old man did keep his promise after all. She cried, repeating that she would never forget this. She promised herself that as soon as she got home, she would definitely call him and express how grateful she was for all of this. That's how it is, save an old man at the bus stop, and your whole life gets better from it, the chief doctor said with a smile and left the nursing room. Linda imagined how she would tell her mother about everything. She was overjoyed. Linda went home without paying attention to the road. She didn't care about bumps and puddles, sidewalk potholes, or crooked curbs. She noticed nothing else in this life except how her fate had changed. Mom, I'm going to be a doctor, Linda shouted, bursting into the apartment. But there was only silence in response. Linda felt a stone in her chest from fear. Everything inside her bubbled, and she swallowed hard. Without even taking off her shoes, she peeked into the living room, afraid to see her mother lifeless. In any other case, her mother would have definitely answered her. Linda constantly reassured herself that her mom felt better. Maybe she just went downstairs with a friend. But then Linda found an envelope lying on the table. Her mother was nowhere to be seen. In the envelope, there was a note. Here's a card for you for the first time. If you don't splurge, it will last for a year. I'm glad to know that I changed your destiny. We need to help people like you because there is no justice in this world. I sent your mom for treatment. She's already on the plane. Linda was nearly shocked. She had forgotten that she was sitting in the living room, fully dressed. She was staring at one point, trying to digest what had just happened. Linda looked at the note again and quickly dialed the phone number handwritten on the envelope. When she called, she tearfully thanked the old man. Don't tell me so many grateful words. You saved my life, dear. Be happy and live as you want. Hopefully, I'll come to you as a patient someday. You'll be a great doctor. You've got golden hands. I've paid for your mom's treatment and rehabilitation, so everything will be fine. Live and be happy, the old man said. After everything Santiago had said, the girl was in complete shock at how the old man helped her. Essentially, he was a complete stranger. Linda was crying on the couch. Without her mom in the apartment, it felt lonely and empty. But now everything would change. Her mom had a chance to live. And Linda's own life would be different now. Months passed. Linda was at the airport, scrutinizing every face. It felt like all these people looked alike. Linda was extremely anxious. She couldn't get herself together. She had already crushed the bouquet in her hands. Her legs trembled with impatience. And when she suddenly saw her mother's face, she rushed towards her. Her mom looked healthy, rosy, and happy. They hugged each other and cried, realizing how much their future had changed. Not long ago, they were sitting in the apartment, crying, realizing that everything was hopeless. And now Linda would become a doctor. Her mom received the necessary treatment. The surgery turned out to be more than successful. Rehabilitation went faster, and the woman was able to return home 2 weeks earlier. When they returned to the apartment, the woman was very surprised. In these 6 months, Linda had done a light cosmetic repair with her own hands. It was enough to make the apartment look great. Mom, I've also put things at home in order. I just wanted to tell you that I've decided not to stay in the apartment. I want to spend the remaining years surrounded by flowers in my greenhouse with a dog. I'll definitely get a dog. Now I'll allow myself everything that I denied for so many years, she said cheerfully. I'll return to my remote work. There will be enough money. Her mother sat on the small couch and looked attentively at the place where she had spent the last few years. She hadn't thought that she would ever leave the apartment. All she wanted was for her daughter to finally be happy. After all, the woman was most concerned that she was ruining her young daughter's life. How are your studies? Her mother asked. Wonderful. Truly, Mom. I can't believe I did it. I'll be a doctor. I have just a little bit left. The years will fly by unnoticed, and I'll stay in the same hospital. Can you imagine? Lord, how difficult it is to organize everything in my mind. I have to combine work, but I can only go for my shifts. Everything is so good. Linda couldn't focus on anything. They sat in the kitchen, telling each other how everything would now change. Years passed. Linda arrived at her grandmother's house, where her mother now lived. A little black Pomeranian dog rushed to the gate, barking loudly. "Look, you're so active," Linda said, picking up the dog. The dog immediately began to lick her face. Her mother came out and hugged her tightly. She wore a thin floral dress with thick gloves on her hands. Probably, she was again busy with her flowers. "Viola brought such wonderful flowers. I just can't believe it. Beautiful. Red as burdock," her mother exclaimed. "I didn't know that burdocks are considered beautiful to you," Linda said, and then burst into laughter. The dog raced between them, slipping between their legs. Her mother laughed too, then led her into the kitchen. The air smelled of apple pies and pleasant scents of cinnamon and dough. It felt as if life had come to a standstill. Linda was happy to see her mother completely happy. The woman smiled, looking at her. "When was the last time we saw each other at the funeral?" her mother asked. "It's a pity about the old man, really. Roque turned out to be a good person, but his family created such an unpleasant reputation for him that it's unbearable." "They didn't even come to the funeral," the woman said with regret. After she returned from rehabilitation, she moved to the house, and the old man often came to her as if she were his own daughter. He ate pies, drank coffee, and chatted, leaving money for himself. He said that he needed to plant some evergreen plants. So the spruce remained to grow, although the old man himself was no longer alive. They said he went to sleep in the evening, and in the morning he simply didn't open his eyes. After the old man died, monstrous quarrels began. It turned out that he had transferred the company to his friend, with whom they did business together. That friend divided it among his sons, and the company flourished. So, the old man made the right choice if he wanted his business to live even after the death of the founder. He split huge bills. One of the bills he left to his savior and her mother, with whom he spent so much time. He even learned to plant flowers, something he had never done before. As a child, he rejoiced when the pink bush, planted by his own hands, bloomed. He left another bill to the children's hospital, where they treated oncology, thereby saving many lives. Yet he left another bill to the children's orphanage. However, he left his own children and grandson without a penny. Heavy legal battles began. Malvina, David, and Santiago tried to reclaim all those bills. However, since the will was written while the old man was of sound mind, nothing could be done. The funeral was modest, just as the old man had always wanted. It's a pity that the closest relatives never showed up. After the funeral, Linda immediately left for the largest conference, where she stayed for 4 months. Then, for 2 months, she hurriedly worked with all the patients who had accumulated during that time. Then there was another conference, and only now did she come to her mother. They hadn't been so far away from each other for such a long time, so they were very happy to spend time together. "Did Santiago really come?" her mother asked. "Imagine, after everything he did with his family, he came as if nothing had happened. Smiling, he told me that everything was fine and that he was ready to forgive me." "What? He's ready? What a cheeky fellow!" the woman exclaimed. "That's what I thought when he started talking. I was looking at him, thinking, is he a fool or just pretending? Where does he get such thoughts? He thinks that I owe him something. He forgives me. Many years have passed, and he showed up. He's changed. I didn't even recognize him at first. He became bald, his belly has grown," the girl shrugged. "As far as I know, he still lives with his mother. Such people can't get away at all. See, and you cried over that situation in the restaurant. How well everything turned out." "Fate protected you," her mother said. Linda agreed with her. In the evening, she planned to go home because she would be going to work tomorrow. She wanted to spend as much time at the workplace as possible. After all, she loved the hospital so much, where she had continued to work. Despite Flora remaining a nurse, she and Linda remained close friends. Even during the challenging times when Linda was torn between work and study. In the morning, Linda went to work. She was in a great mood, humming a song. Today, she would have enough patients to prescribe treatments. How many years had she worked after her studies? Linda felt immense gratitude towards the old man who changed not only her life, but also her mother's life. Linda parked her car, got out, and headed towards the hospital. The glass doors opened, and she greeted everyone she saw with a smile. "Linda, would you like to come to my office?" The chief doctor asked. "Although, let's do it publicly. I've already asked them, and they are more than willing. Will you go to the department head's office?" Linda was simply stunned by what she heard. She nodded in agreement, and the doctor rushed to hug her. "Oh, I was afraid I would have to persuade you." "Excellent. After work, come to my office, and we'll discuss the details." I was afraid I would have to look for someone after Giorgio left. Flora hugged her and gave her a tight kiss on the cheek. The other doctors hugged her and patted her on the shoulder encouragingly. Linda could see that they were happy about it. She hadn't even expected to take such a position so early. Well, she really wanted to become the head of the department. Someday, maybe in the next 10 years, she would become the chief doctor. But even if she stayed in her current position, she would be happy. That evening, she would once again look up at the sky and thank the old man for such a life-changing opportunity.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.